The silence that followed Jean Wu's revelation stretched between them like a taut wire, broken only by the soft sound of Marcus breathing on the makeshift bed. Lila's hand moved instinctively toward her purse, where she kept a small canister of pepper spray, but she forced herself to remain still. Running would wake Marcus, and whatever this man wanted, she would not let the child see her panic. "You need to leave," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "I don't know who you are or how you got my number, but I'm calling the police." Jean Wu watched her reach for her phone with something that might have been admiration. Most people confronted with the reality of his presence either cowered or tried to negotiate. This woman was preparing to fight, despite being outmatched in every conceivable way. "That would be unwise," he said, making no move to stop her. "The police cannot protect you from what is coming." "What are you talking about?" Before he could answer, her phone rang. The caller ID made her frown, Derek's name flashing on the screen. Her ex-boyfriend rarely contacted her, especially not at dawn on a weekday. She considered ignoring the call, but something about the timing made her uneasy. "Lila," Derek's voice was tight with panic when she answered. "Baby, I'm so sorry. I never thought they would actually go after you." "Derek, what are you talking about? I'm kind of in the middle of something here. I owe some people money. A lot of money. And they're using you and Marcus as collateral until I pay up. They know where you live, where you work, where the kid goes to school. They've been watching you." Lila's blood went cold. She looked up at Jean Wu, who was listening to every word with an expression of grim satisfaction, as if Derek's call was confirming something he already knew. "How much money?" she asked. 60,000. I thought I could win it back, but the games are rigged." "Baby, you need to disappear for a while. Take Marcus and go stay with your cousin in Birmingham or something." The call ended abruptly, leaving Lila staring at her phone in disbelief. Derek had always been irresponsible with money, but this level of stupidity was breathtaking even for him. More terrifying was the realization that Jean Wu's presence here was no coincidence. "You knew," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I suspected. Your ex-boyfriend is in debt to the Kozlov brothers, Russian loan sharks who operate out of Miami but have interests here. They are not known for their patience or their mercy." "How do you know this?" "Because 30 minutes ago, my people intercepted communications indicating that a nurse named Lila Williams and a child named Marcus were being surveilled as pressure points against Derek Williams. The Kozlovs have been taking photographs of your daily routines for the past week." Jean Wu pulled out his phone and showed her a series of images that made her stomach lurch. Marcus walking out his daycare center, her emerging from the hospital after her shift, both of them grocery shopping at the corner market. The photos were taken from various angles and distances, professional surveillance that proved Derek's panic call was telling the truth. "This is impossible," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. The evidence was right there on the screen, and the timing of Jean Wu's appearance suddenly made terrible sense. "The Kozlovs are brutal but predictable. They will use you and the child to force Derek's compliance. If he cannot pay, they will sell you both to recover their losses. There are markets for nurses with medical training, and children bring premium prices in certain circles." The clinical way he described her potential fate made Lila's legs weak. She sank onto the edge of the couch, careful not to disturb Marcus, and tried to process what was happening. 24 hours ago, her biggest problem was finding reliable childcare. Now, she was apparently caught up in some nightmare involving Russian criminals and human trafficking. "What do you want?" she asked. "To help you." "Why? You don't even know me." Jean Wu was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those dark, unreadable eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested the answer mattered to him more than he wanted to admit. "Because you trusted a stranger with the most precious thing in your world. Because you work double shifts to care for a child who is not yours and never complain about the sacrifice. Because when you thought I was here to hurt that child, you prepared to fight me with pepper spray and pure determination." He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne, something expensive and understated that seemed to belong in boardrooms rather than studio apartments. And because in 15 years of controlling territory from Los Angeles to Seoul, I have never encountered anyone who contacted my private number asking for help with a little one and actually meant exactly what they said. The words hung between them, loaded with implications she was not ready to examine. Jin Woo Kim was dangerous. That much was obvious from his precise movements and the cold calculation in his eyes. But he was also offering her something she desperately needed: protection for Marcus. What kind of help? She asked carefully. Safe housing, security, resources to ensure the Kozlovs never get near you or the child. And in exchange? Nothing. This is not a transaction. This is me preventing a wrong that should never be allowed to happen. Lila wanted to believe him, but her nursing training had taught her to look for the underlying pathology, the hidden damage that might not be immediately visible. Men like Jin Woo did not offer help without expecting something in return. I don't understand, she said. Then let me be clear. You and Marcus will move to a secure location where the Kozlovs cannot reach you. You will be fed, clothed, and protected until the threat is eliminated. In return, you will follow certain safety protocols designed to keep you alive, which are no contact with the outside world except through approved channels, no leaving the secure area without escort, no information about your location shared with anyone, including Derek. That sounds like prison, not protection. It sounds like survival. The alternative is that you and Marcus become commodities in a market where your value decreases rapidly once your usefulness ends. The brutal honesty of his words cut through her denial. She looked down at Marcus, sleeping peacefully with his worn stuffed elephant clutched in his small arms. The child had already lost his father to absence and his mother to deployment. He deserved better than to become a victim of Derek's gambling addiction and her own naive assumption that wrong numbers were the worst thing that could happen at 2 in the morning. How long? She asked. Until the threat is neutralized. And you'll really ask for nothing in return? I will ask for your cooperation with security measures designed to keep you both safe. Beyond that, you owe me nothing. There is something in his voice, a barely detectable softness, that made her look up at him again. For just a moment, the cold mask slipped, and she saw something else underneath. Loneliness, perhaps, or a bone-deep weariness that spoke of carrying heavy burdens for too long. I need time to think, she said. You have until Marcus wakes up. After that, the choice will be made for you. The implicit threat should have terrified her, but instead it clarified everything. Jin Woo was offering her agency in a situation where she had none. The Kozlovs would take what they wanted regardless of her cooperation. At least with him, she retained some measure of control over her fate. What kind of secure location? She asked. My penthouse. 32nd floor, private elevator access, security team on duty around the clock. Marcus will have his own room, access to educational resources, and space to play safely. And me? You will have a suite with privacy and autonomy within the security parameters. You may continue your nursing career at a private medical facility that serves my organization's needs. So I will be working for you. You would be working as a medical professional in a controlled environment where your skills are valued and your safety is guaranteed. Lila closed her eyes and tried to imagine explaining this to Deshawn. Her sister would never understand how a wrong number had led to accepting protection from a Korean crime boss. Hell, Lila did not understand it herself. But understanding was a luxury she could not afford when Marcus's safety hung in the balance. Marcus stirred on the couch, making the soft sounds that meant he would be awake soon. Once he was conscious, Lila knew she would lose the ability to make rational decisions. Her love for the child would override every logical concern about accepting help from a dangerous stranger. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, we'll come with you. But I have conditions. Jin Woo's expression did not change, but she sensed his surprise. Apparently, people did not usually negotiate with him. State them. Marcus doesn't know any of this is happening because of danger. As far as he's concerned, we're staying with a friend while Derek sorts out some problems. Agreed. I want updates on Derek's situation. If he gets himself killed, I need to know so I can prepare Marcus. Understood. And if you try to hurt either one of us, I will find a way to make you regret it, regardless of how much security you have. Jin Woo studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I believe you would. Those are acceptable terms. Marcus opened his eyes at that moment, blinking sleepily in the morning light filtering through the windows. He saw Jean Wu and sat up with the easy curiosity of a child who had learned to adapt to new situations. Hi, he said politely. Are you Aunt Lila's friend? I am, Jean Wu replied, and something in his voice gentled as he addressed the child. My name is Jean Wu. Your aunt and I were just discussing a place where you could stay for a while. Like a vacation? Very much like a vacation. Marcus looked at Lila for confirmation, and she managed to smile despite the surreal turn her life had taken. That's right, baby. We're going to stay somewhere new for a little while. Okay? Will there be cartoons? Jean Wu's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. There will be cartoons, he promised, and anything else you need. As Marcus began chattering excitedly about the possibility of new adventures, Lila caught Jean Wu's eye over the child's head. The look that passed between them was complex, weighted with unspoken understanding. She was trusting him with everything that mattered to her, and he was accepting that responsibility with a gravity that suggested he understood exactly what she was giving up. Whatever came next, there would be no going back to her carefully ordered life of hospital shifts and quiet evenings with Marcus. She was stepping into Jean Wu Kim's world, and she could only hope that his promise of protection would prove stronger than the dangers that had made it necessary. The penthouse occupied the entire 32nd floor of the Meridian Tower, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of downtown Los Angeles that made Marcus press his face against the glass in wonder. Jean Wu watched the child's excitement with an expression that Lila was beginning to recognize as carefully controlled surprise, as if genuine joy was something he encountered so rarely that he needed time to process it. This is like being in an airplane, Marcus announced, his breath fogging the pristine glass. Aunt Lila, look how tiny all the cars are. She joined him at the window, acutely aware of Jean Wu's presence behind them. The apartment was a study in expensive minimalism, clean lines, neutral colors, and furniture that looked more like art installations than places where people actually lived. Everything spoke of wealth and control, but nothing suggested comfort or warmth. The guest suite is down this hall, Jean Wu said, leading them away from the living area. Marcus will have the room adjacent to yours, with a connecting door if he needs you during the night. The rooms he showed them were larger than her entire apartment, furnished with care that suggested someone had put thought into what a woman and child might need. Marcus's room featured a twin bed with a superhero comforter, shelves stocked with age-appropriate books and toys, and a small desk positioned near the window. Lila's suite included a king-size bed, a sitting area, and a bathroom with a soaking tub that probably cost more than she made in a month. How did you arrange all this so quickly? She asked. I have efficient staff. They anticipated your needs based on the information available. The clinical way he described their accommodation made her realize how thoroughly he must have researched their lives. The toys in Marcus's room were exactly the kinds of things a 5-year-old boy would enjoy. Her bathroom was stocked with products for natural hair care that most white people would never think to provide. Thank you, she said quietly. This is more than I expected. It is adequate. Dinner will be ready at 6. Until then, you should rest and allow Marcus to explore his new environment. Jean Wu turned to leave, but Marcus's voice stopped him. Are you going to eat dinner with us? The question seemed to catch him off guard. Lila watched his carefully composed mask flicker as he looked down at the child who was studying him with frank curiosity. If you would like that, he said finally. I would. Aunt Lila makes really good mac and cheese, but she says I need to try new foods too. What kind of food do you like? Korean food, mostly, but I think you might find it too spicy. I like spicy food, Marcus declared with the confidence of a child who had never actually encountered anything spicier than mild salsa. Jean Wu's lips curved in what was almost a smile. We will see, he said. After he left, Lila helped Marcus unpack his few belongings and explore his new room. The child adapted to the luxurious surroundings with a resilience that never failed to amaze her, treating the expensive toys and furniture as if they were perfectly normal additions to his life. Aunt Lila, he said as she tucked him in for an afternoon nap. Is Jinwoo really your friend? We're getting to know each other, she replied carefully. Why do you ask? He seemed sad, like the way you looked after Mommy left. The observation was so perceptive it made her chest ache. Marcus had always been unusually intuitive about emotions, picking up on feelings that adults try to hide. If he sensed sadness in Jinwoo, it was probably there, buried beneath all that control and precision. Some people carry sadness inside them. Baby, it doesn't mean they're not good people. Do you think he needs hugs? Hugs always make me feel better when I'm sad. Lila kissed his forehead, marveling at the pure generosity of a child's heart. Maybe he does, but some grown-ups aren't used to hugs, so we have to be careful about giving them too many too fast. Okay? Marcus nodded solemnly and closed his eyes. Within minutes, he was asleep, one small hand clutching his worn elephant while sunlight painted patterns across the expensive carpet. Lila made her way back to the main living area, intending to call the hospital and explain her sudden absence. Instead, she found herself drawn to the wall of windows that showcased the sprawling city below. From this height, Los Angeles looked deceptively peaceful, all sharp angles and glittering glass with no hint of the violence and desperation that lurked in its shadows. You should call your supervisor and explain that you have a family emergency. Jinwoo's voice came from behind her. I have already arranged for a physician to provide documentation of your nephew's illness, should it be required. She turned to find him watching her with those dark, unreadable eyes. He had changed from his suit into dark jeans and a black sweater that made him look younger, but no less dangerous. You think of everything, don't you? Preparation prevents complications. In my business, overlooking details can be fatal. What exactly is your business? She asked the question that had been nagging at her since Derek's phone call. I manage interests across multiple sectors. Import, export, security, real estate. Some of it is legal, some of it operates in gray areas, and some of it would be difficult to explain to law enforcement. The honest answer surprised her. She had expected deflection or lies, not this matter-of-fact admission of criminal activity. Does that bother you? He asked, studying her reaction. Should it? Most people would say yes. I'm a nurse. I've seen what poverty and desperation do to families. I've also seen what happens when people with power use it to hurt those who can't fight back. As long as you're not doing the latter, I'm not going to judge you for the former. Jinwoo was quiet for a long moment, and she had the sense that her response had surprised him. You're not what I expected, he said finally. What did you expect? Fear, judgment, attempts to negotiate for better terms or find ways to escape. And instead, you're making mac and cheese for dinner and asking thoughtful questions about my moral boundaries. Lila realized he was right. Despite the surreal circumstances, she felt oddly at ease in his presence. The man who had appeared at her door that morning had been coldly intimidating. This version, standing in his own space with his defenses slightly lowered, was something else entirely. Can I ask you something? She said. Yes. When was the last time you had a home-cooked meal? The question clearly caught him off guard. He frowned as if she had asked him to solve a complex mathematical equation. I have a chef, he said finally. That's not what I asked. His silence stretched long enough that she thought he might not answer. I do not remember, he admitted. The admission hung between them, loaded with implications that made her chest tighten. She thought about the sterile perfection of his penthouse, the way he had watched Marcus's joy with such surprise, the careful distance he maintained even when offering help. Well, you're about to, she said. Mac and cheese might not be fancy, but it's made with love. Jinwoo's expression shifted, and for a moment she saw something raw and unguarded flash across his features before he reassembled his mask. I should warn you that I may not be available for dinner after all, he said. Business requires my attention this evening. But he was there at 6 o'clock sharp when she called him to the table. She had taken over his pristine kitchen, filling the space with a warm sense of comfort food and the sound of Marcus chattering about his new toys. Jinwoo sat across from them, looking slightly overwhelmed by the casual domesticity of the scene. This is really good, Marcus announced around a mouthful of mac and cheese. Jinwoo, you should try it. I will, he replied, but Lila noticed he was eating slowly, as if savoring each bite. The conversation flowed more easily than she had expected, with Marcus serving as an unconscious bridge between two very different worlds. He asked Jinwoo questions about his work that were innocent enough to answer safely, while Jinwoo found himself drawn into discussions about superhero movies and favorite colors with a seriousness that suggested he was out of practice with casual interaction. After dinner, Marcus insisted on showing Jinwoo his new toys, pulling the man down to his level on the living room carpet. Lila watched from the kitchen as she cleaned dishes, struck by the sight of this controlled, dangerous man allowing himself to be directed by a 5-year-old's enthusiasm. "You have to make the sound effects," Marcus was explaining as he demonstrated how his toy cars worked. "Like this, vroom, screech, crash." Jinwoo dutifully provided sound effects, his deep voice adding dramatic weight to the imaginary car chase. When Marcus giggled at his particularly enthusiastic crash noises, Jinwoo's face transformed with something that might have been wonder. It was past 9 when Marcus finally succumbed to exhaustion, falling asleep on the couch with his head pillowed on Jinwoo's thigh. Lila moved to wake him, but Jinwoo gestured for her to wait. "Let him sleep," he said quietly. "I will carry him to his room when you are ready." The gentleness with which he lifted the sleeping child was at odds with everything she thought she knew about him. Marcus stirred slightly as Jinwoo carried him down the hall, but settled immediately when the man murmured something soft in Korean. After Marcus was tucked into bed, Lila found Jinwoo standing at the windows again, staring out at the city lights with an expression that looked like longing. "Thank you," she said, "for being so patient with him. He's an easy child to like. He's been through a lot of upheaval in his short life. His father was never in the picture, and then Deshawn deployed 6 months ago. I worry about how all this instability affects him. He seems remarkably resilient. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for, but they also notice more than we think. He was right, about you seeming sad." Jinwoo's shoulders tensed slightly. "Children often misinterpret what they observe in adults," he said. "Do they?" She moved closer, studying his profile in the reflected city lights. "When was the last time you slept?" The question seemed to startle him. "I sleep when necessary," he replied. "That's not an answer." "When was the last time you slept more than 3 hours at stretch?" His silence confirmed her suspicions. As a nurse, she had learned to recognize the signs of chronic sleep deprivation. The subtle tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking, the way his eyes tracked movement just a fraction too intently, the controlled stillness that spoke of a body running on willpower and caffeine. "You have nightmares," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Professional observation." Plus, Marcus was right about recognizing sadness. "You carry yourself like someone who's afraid to let his guard down, even when he's safe." "I'm never entirely safe." "Maybe not, but you're safe here, in your own space, with people who aren't going to hurt you. When was the last time you let yourself really rest?" Jinwoo turned to look at her directly, and she saw something vulnerable flash across his features. "I do not remember," he admitted for the second time that day. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications. Lila found herself stepping closer, drawn by an instinct that had nothing to do with their complicated circumstances and everything to do with the fundamental human need to offer comfort to someone who was quietly drowning. "May I?" she asked, gesturing toward his left shoulder, which he had been favoring slightly all evening. "What? You're injured." "Old injury, probably, but it's bothering you." "I'm a nurse, remember?" Jinwoo hesitated, and she could see him weighing the vulnerability of allowing her to touch him against the relief that medical attention might provide. "It is an old bullet wound," he said finally. "Sometimes it aches. Sit down." He lowered himself onto the couch with careful precision, and she could see the lines of tension that spoke of chronic pain he was too disciplined to acknowledge. When she placed her hands on his shoulder, he went completely still. "Relax," she murmured, her fingers finding the knots of scar tissue and muscle tension with practiced ease. "I'm not going to hurt you." Her touch was professional but gentle, working to ease the chronic tightness that came from carrying stress in his shoulders for too many years. Jean Wu's breathing gradually deepened as she worked, and she realized this might be the first time in years that anyone had touched him with healing rather than violence in mind. "Better?" she asked quietly when she felt some of the tension release. "Yes," he said, but his voice was rougher than usual. "Thank you." When she moved to step away, his hand caught her wrist with surprising gentleness. "Lila," he said, and her name in his voice carried a weight that made her heart skip. "Yes. No one has cared about my well-being in 15 years. The admission was quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise of the city beyond the windows, but it hit her with the force of a revelation. This man who controlled territory across 2 continents, who inspired fear in hardened criminals, who had resources most people could only dream of, was fundamentally alone in the world. "Well," she said softly, "someone does now." The look that passed between them was charged with something neither of them was ready to name. Jean Wu's thumb traced once across the pulse point of her wrist before he released her, and she could feel the echo of that touch long after she returned to her room. As she lay in the expensive bed, listening to the soft sounds of Marcus sleeping next door and the almost inaudible movements that suggested Jean Wu was still awake somewhere in the penthouse, Lila realized that everything she thought she understood about their situation was changing. She had agreed to this arrangement to protect Marcus from the Kozlov brothers. But as she drifted towards sleep, she found herself thinking not about Russian loan sharks or gambling debts, but about the way Jean Wu's voice had gentled when he spoke to a child and the carefully hidden loneliness in his dark eyes. Tomorrow, she told herself, she would remember that he was dangerous. Tonight, she was falling asleep thinking about the fact that someone needed her care as much as she needed his protection, and that maybe, just maybe, they could heal each other. 3 days into their stay at the penthouse, Lila decided she had reached her limit with luxurious captivity. She found Jean Wu in his home office, surrounded by multiple monitors displaying financial data and security feeds. His attention focused on what appeared to be a video conference conducted entirely in Korean. He held up one finger when she entered, a gesture that would have been dismissive from anyone else, but somehow managed to be apologetic when he did it. She waited, studying the controlled intensity with which he conducted his business, the way his voice dropped to dangerous levels when delivering what sounded like ultimatums. When he ended the call, his attention shifted to her, with the complete focus she was beginning to recognize as characteristic of everything he did. "What do you need?" he asked. "To go back to work." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Jean Wu's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders shift slightly, the subtle tightening that indicated she had moved into territory he considered non-negotiable. "That is not possible," he said. "Why not?" "Because the Kozlov brothers are still searching for you. Because your workplace is public and therefore indefensible. Because returning to your normal routine would be the most effective way to ensure both your death and the child's." Lila had spent the past 3 days anticipating this argument, and she was ready for it. "I'm a trauma nurse, Jean Wu. I save lives for a living. You can't ask me to sit here playing house while people are dying because they're short-staffed at the hospital." "I am not asking," he replied, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to absolute obedience. "I am telling you that your safety requires certain constraints." The casual assumption of control over her life ignited something fierce in Lila's chest. She stepped closer to his desk, planting her hands on its polished surface and leaning forward to meet his gaze directly. "Let me tell you something about constraints," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "I grew up poor in Atlanta, raised by a grandmother who worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. I put myself through nursing school working nights at a diner and weekends at a laundromat. I've been taking care of other people since I was 12 years old, and I have never, not once, let someone else decide what I could or couldn't do with my life." Jean Wu watched her with an expression that might have been surprise, as if he was seeing something in her that he hadn't expected. "That determination is admirable," he said. "It is also irrelevant to your current circumstances. Watch me make it relevant." She straightened and pulled out her phone, scrolling to the hospital's main number. Jean Wu's eyes tracked her movements with predatory awareness, but he made no move to stop her. Atlanta General Emergency Department, the familiar voice answered. Hi, this is Lila Williams. Can you transfer me to Dr. Chen? Jean Wu's jaw tightened as he realized what she was doing, but his stillness was the controlled stillness of a predator calculating its next move. Lila, Dr. Chen's voice carried relief and frustration in equal measure. Where the hell are you? We've been short 2 nurses for the past 3 days, and I have residents dropping from exhaustion. I'm dealing with a family emergency, but I want to come back. Can you work with me on modified hours or different duties? What kind of modifications? Maybe private duty nursing? I know you have connections with some of the exclusive medical facilities downtown. There was a pause, and she could practically hear Dr. Chen's wheels turning. Actually, yes. There's a private clinic in Westwood that's been asking for experienced trauma nurses. Very discreet clientele, excellent pay, flexible scheduling. I can make a call. That would be perfect. Can you send me the details? After she hung up, Lila looked at Jean Wu with satisfaction. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between admiration and exasperation. You just negotiated your way around my security concerns without asking my permission, he said. I don't need your permission to work. I need your cooperation to stay safe while I do it. The distinction seemed to intrigue him. He leaned back in his chair, studying her face with the intensity he usually reserved for business negotiations. The clinic Dr. Chen mentioned is one of mine, he said finally. Lila blinked, processing the implications of that statement. Yours how? I own it. It provides medical services for my organization and selected clients who prefer discretion over traditional hospital care. So you're saying I can work there? I am saying that if you were determined to resume nursing, that facility would be the only acceptable option. It has security measures that would protect you while allowing you to practice your profession. The concession felt like a victory, but Lila sensed there were conditions attached that he hadn't mentioned yet. Weren't you telling me? She asked. The clientele includes individuals whose injuries result from activities that law enforcement might find interesting. You would be required to provide medical care without asking questions about how those injuries were acquired. Lila considered this. She had treated gunshot wounds and knife injuries before, both in the ER and during her brief stint in a clinic that served the undocumented population. The circumstances that led to those injuries were often complicated, and she had learned long ago that healing took priority over judgment. As long as I'm treating people who need help, I can live with not knowing the details, she said. Something shifted in Jean Wu's expression, a subtle relaxation that suggested her answer had pleased him. There's one more condition, he said, which is, you will be accompanied by security at all times. Non-negotiable. That's acceptable. The ease with which she agreed clearly surprised him. Most people, she realized, probably fought him harder on the details once he had made a major concession. Why are you being reasonable about the security? He asked. Because I'm not stupid. I know I'm in danger, and I know you have resources I don't. But I also know that I need to be useful to feel human, and sitting in this penthouse playing with Marcus's toys for the next month will drive me insane. Jean Wu was quiet for a long moment, and she had the sense that he was reassessing something fundamental about how he approached their arrangement. You begin tomorrow, he said. 8 a.m. My driver will take you, and 2 members of my security team will be stationed at the clinic. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. You may find that working within my world is more complicated than you anticipate. The warning proved prescient when she arrived at the clinic the next morning. The facility itself was everything she could have wanted. State-of-the-art equipment, well-trained staff, and a patient load that challenged her skills without overwhelming her resources. What she hadn't anticipated was the way Jean Wu's men watched her every interaction with male colleagues, or how her obvious connection to their boss affected the way others treated her. Dr. Martinez, the clinic's chief physician, was professional but distant during their introduction. The nurses were polite but careful, as if unsure how much familiarity their boss would tolerate regarding his woman. Because that, she realized with growing discomfort, was clearly how everyone perceived her role in Jean Wu's life. The situation came to a head 3 days later when Dr. James Morrison, a visiting trauma surgeon from Cedars-Sinai, asked her to dinner. He was attractive in an educated, sophisticated way that reminded her of the doctors she had occasionally dated before Marcus became a priority. His invitation was casual and friendly, the kind of normal interaction she had been missing since her life took its surreal turn. "I'd love to," she told him. "Let me just check my schedule." The security team's reaction was immediate and intense. The lead agent, a stone-faced man named Chun, stepped forward with the kind of purposeful movement that made Dr. Morrison instinctively back away. "Ms. Williams is not available for social engagements," Chun said flatly. The humiliation was instant and complete. Every conversation in the break room stopped as her colleagues witnessed her being managed like property rather than treated like a professional. "Excuse me," she said to Chun, her voice carrying the steel that Jinwoo was beginning to recognize as dangerous. "Can I see you outside for a moment?" In the hallway, she turned on the security agent with fury that made him take a step backward. "Do not ever embarrass me like that again," she said. "If someone asks me out, you let me handle it. You don't speak for me, and you don't make decisions about my personal life." Mr. Kim was very specific about social interactions with male colleagues, Chun replied. "Then Mr. Kim and I need to have a conversation." She was still furious when she arrived back at the penthouse that evening. Jinwoo took one look at her face and dismissed the security team with a gesture, leaving them alone in the living room where Marcus was building an elaborate tower for blocks. "We need to talk," she said. "I assumed as much from Chen's report. Your man humiliated me in front of my colleagues today. He refused a social invitation on my behalf and made it clear that I'm not allowed to make my own decisions about who I spend time with." Jinwoo's expression was carefully neutral, but she caught the flash of something darker in his eyes. "Dr. Morrison," he said. "How do you already know his name?" "Because I know everything that happens in my clinic, including the fact that Dr. Morrison has asked 3 female staff members to dinner in the past month and has a reputation for pursuing relationships with women in vulnerable professional situations." "That's irrelevant," Lila shot back. "The point is that I should get to decide whether or not to have dinner with him." "You don't own me, Jinwoo." "No," he agreed, but his voice carried an edge that made her think of controlled violence. "I do not own you. I protect you. Sometimes those two things require the same actions, and sometimes they don't. Sometimes protection becomes control, and control becomes possession. I won't live like that." She watched him struggle with something, his careful composure fracturing just enough to reveal the raw emotion underneath. When he finally spoke, his voice was rougher than usual. "The thought of another man touching you makes me want to commit violence," he said. "That is not protection. That is possession, and I'm aware of the distinction." The honest admission caught her off guard. She had been prepared for an argument about security protocols, not for this kind of emotional confession. "Jinwoo," she said more gently, "I know what I am, Lila. I know the darkness I carry and the violence I am capable of. I know that my need to control everything around you comes from fear, not logic. But I also know that if something happened to you, because I allowed too much freedom, I would not survive it." The raw vulnerability in his voice made her step closer instead of pulling away. "Tell me about the fear," she said. He was quiet for so long that she thought he might not answer. Marcus's chatter about his block tower provided a soundtrack of innocent normalcy that seemed to belong to a different world entirely. "I was 7 when I watched my parents die," Jinwoo said finally. "Korean organized crime was different then, more brutal and less organized. My father tried to leave the business, and they made an example of him. And my mother, and they would have killed me too, except I was small enough to hide." Lila's heart clenched at the image of a 7-year-old boy witnessing that kind of horror. "I spent 3 years on the streets before the American branch of the organization found me and brought me to Los Angeles. They raised me to be useful, trained me to be deadly, and taught me that power was the only protection that mattered. By the time I was 20, I controlled more territory than the men who had orphaned me." The clinical way he recounted his history didn't disguise the profound trauma underlying every word. "I built an empire so I would never be powerless again," he continued, "so I could protect what mattered to me and destroy anything that threatened it. For 15 years, that approach worked because nothing mattered enough to threaten. And now, she asked softly, now I have you and Marcus, and the thought of losing either of you terrifies me in ways I thought I had eliminated from my emotional vocabulary. The rational part of my mind knows that controlling your social interactions will not keep you safe from the Kozlovs. The damaged part of my mind does not care about logic. Lila reached out and took his hand, feeling the tension in his fingers gradually relax under her touch. I'm not going anywhere, she said, but I need you to trust me to make good decisions about my own safety. And I need you to trust that I don't want Dr. Morrison or anyone else. She stopped, suddenly aware that she was about to cross a line they had been carefully avoiding. What do you want? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. You, she admitted. I want you. But I want the man who carries Marcus to bed and makes sound effect for toy cars, not the one who has his security team manage my social calendar. Jean Wu's thumb traced across her knuckles, and she could see him processing the implications of her confession. Those are the same man, he said. The darkness and the tenderness exist in the same space. I cannot separate them. I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to trust me with both. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Chun, whose expression suggested the kind of urgent business that couldn't wait for convenient timing. Sir, he said, we have a problem. Jean Wu's hand tightened on hers as his attention shifted to immediate threat assessment mode. What kind of problem? The Kozlovs have made contact with Park Jungo. Lila felt Jean Wu go completely still beside her. Whatever that name meant, it was bad news. Who's Park Jungo? She asked. Jean Wu's former lieutenant, Chen explained. The one who tried to take over the Los Angeles territory 2 years ago. The one I should have killed when I had the chance, Jean Wu said quietly. Sir, there's more. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning to target the clinic. Specifically, they're planning to target your woman. The possessive phrasing might have bothered Lila under other circumstances, but the immediate danger took priority over semantic concerns. How much time do we have? Jean Wu asked. Unknown, but Park has been asking questions about Ms. Williams's schedule and security arrangements. He knows she's important to you. Jean Wu stood, his entire demeanor shifting from vulnerable man to dangerous predator in the space of a heartbeat. Double security at the clinic immediately. I want armed teams on every floor and a tactical response unit on standby. I want Park found. Yes, sir. After Chen left, Jean Wu turned to Lila with an expression that was equal parts apology and determination. You cannot return to the clinic, he said. Like hell I can't. Lila, this is not about control. This is about survival. Park knows exactly how to hurt me, and he will use you to do it. Then we make sure he doesn't get the chance. But I'm not going to hide in this penthouse while he threatens everything we've built. We? The question in his voice suggested the word had caught him off guard. We, she confirmed. You're not facing this alone anymore, Jean Wu. Whatever comes next, we handle it together. The look that passed between them was charged with promises neither of them was ready to make explicit. But as Jean Wu pulled her closer, and Marcus looked up from his blocks to beam at them with innocent approval, Lila realized that somewhere between challenging his control and earning his trust, she had fallen completely in love with the most dangerous man she had ever met. And, judging by the way he was looking at her, he had fallen just as hard. The attack came during the morning shift change, when security protocols were at their most vulnerable. Lila was 3 hours into a complex surgery on a construction worker who had suffered massive internal injuries, her hands steady as she worked to repair damaged arteries while Dr. Martinez assisted. The patient was stable but critical, requiring her complete focus and precision. She never heard the first gunshot. The power went out without warning, plunging the operating theater into darkness before the emergency generators kicked in with their harsh white light. Through the sudden chaos outside the surgical suite, she could hear shouting in multiple languages and the unmistakable sound of automatic weapons fire. Dr. Martinez looked up from the patient with fear stark in his eyes. What do we do? He asked. We finished this surgery, Lila replied, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. This man dies if we stop now. But if those men get in here, then we deal with that when it happens. Right now, our patient needs us. Her hands never wavered as she continued the delicate repair work, even as the sounds of violence grew closer to their location. She had trained for this kind of situation during her military nursing certification, learning to maintain focus under fire, but she had never imagined needing those skills in Jean Wu's supposedly secure clinic. The door to the operating suite exploded inward just as she was completing the arterial graft. 3 men in tactical gear poured through the entrance, weapons trained on the surgical team. Their leader, a tall Korean man with cold eyes and precision movements, gestured for his men to secure the room. "Dr. Williams," he said politely, as if introducing himself at a dinner party. "My employer would like to speak with you." "I'm in the middle of surgery," she replied without looking up from her patient. "Whatever your employer wants can wait until this man is stable." The gunman's expression shifted to something like surprise, as if he had not expected her to prioritize medical duty over personal safety. "I think you misunderstand the situation," he said. "I understand it perfectly. You're here to kidnap me to get to Jean Wu. But right now, this patient will die without immediate medical attention, so you're going to have to wait." The casual way she acknowledged their purpose while refusing to accommodate, it seemed to throw the leader off his script. He looked at his men, clearly uncertain how to proceed when their target was refusing to cooperate for medical rather than defiant reasons. "Park Jung-go is not a patient, man," he said finally. "Then Park Jung-go should have planned his kidnapping better," Lila replied as she began closing the surgical incision. "Give me 10 more minutes to stabilize this patient, and then I'll come quietly." The promise to cooperate once her medical duties were complete seemed to satisfy the leader enough that he allowed her to finish the surgery. Dr. Martinez worked beside her in terrified silence, following her lead as she completed the procedure with the same methodical precision she would have used under normal circumstances. As she stripped off her surgical gloves and prepared to honor her agreement, the remaining lights went out completely. Emergency power failed with a grinding mechanical sound that left them in absolute darkness for exactly 3 seconds before tactical flashlights blazed to life. Jean Wu's voice cut through the chaos with deadly calm. "Step away from her." The command was delivered in English, but Lila could hear the lethal promise underlying each syllable. She had never heard that particular tone from him before, and it made something primitive in her hindbrain recognize that she was in the presence of an apex predator who had just identified a threat to his territory. "Mr. Kim," the leader said, his weapon swinging toward the new threat. "How good of you to join us." Lila turned toward the sound of Jean Wu's voice and felt her breath catch. Gone was every trace of the gentleman who made sound effects for toy cars and worried about her sleep schedule. In his place stood someone she barely recognized, a figure of controlled violence in tactical gear, flanked by a team of operators who moved with military precision. His eyes found hers across the surgical suite, and for just a moment, she saw relief flicker across his features before his attention returned to immediate threat assessment. "You have 10 seconds to release her and surrender," he said. "Or what? You'll risk a firefight that might hit your precious woman?" The kidnapper's mistake was assuming that Jean Wu's feelings for her would make him hesitant to act. Instead, his protective fury made him exponentially more dangerous. Lila watched him make calculations with terrifying speed, his gaze tracking every angle and threat vector in the room. "No," he said quietly. "I will kill all of you in ways that ensure she remains completely safe." The violence that followed was swift and precise. Jean Wu moved like controlled lightning, his team operating with the kind of synchronized efficiency that spoke of extensive training and absolute trust. The kidnapping attempt was over in less than 30 seconds, leaving 3 unconscious intruders in a surgical suite that would need significant cleanup. Lila found herself pressed against Jean Wu's chest before she fully processed that the danger had passed. His hands moved over her body with clinical efficiency, checking for injuries while his voice murmured reassurances in Korean that she felt more than understood. "Are you hurt?" he asked when he switched back to English. "No," she managed. "But Jean Wu, they said Park has Marcus." The words hit him like a physical blow. She felt his entire body go rigid as the implications registered, watched his expression shift from relief to the kind of focused rage that made her understand exactly why people feared him. Chen's voice crackled through Jean Wu's earpiece with the confirmation they both dreaded. "Sir, the penthouse security team is down. The child is gone." Jean Wu's response was delivered with the cold precision of someone coordinating a military operation. "Initiate lockdown protocol. I want satellite surveillance on every Park property within 50 miles. And I want Jungo's location within the hour." He turned to Lila, and she could see him struggling between his need to keep her safe and the impossible choice Park had forced on him. "I have to go after Marcus," he said. "We have to go after Marcus," she corrected. "He's my nephew, Jean Wu. I'm not staying behind while he's in danger. It's too dangerous. More dangerous than letting Park Jungo have leverage over you." She stepped closer, meeting his gaze directly. "He took Marcus to force you into making mistakes. If you leave me here, you'll be distracted worrying about my safety instead of focused on getting him back." The logic was sound, and they both knew it. Jean Wu's jaw tightened as he weighed impossible options. "If you come with me, you follow my orders without question," he said finally. "This is not a negotiation or a compromise. This is a military operation, and I am in command." "Understood. And if I tell you to run, you run, no matter what is happening to me." "No," she said firmly. "We both come home, or neither of us does. Lila, if something happens to you, then you'd better make sure nothing happens to me." The look that passed between them was charged with everything they had not yet said to each other. Jean Wu's hand cupped her face with surprising gentleness, his thumb tracing across her cheekbone. "I cannot lose you," he said quietly. "Either of you. You have become everything that matters to me." "I know," she replied. "That's why we're going to get him back." The warehouse where Park was holding Marcus sat on the edge of the industrial district, surrounded by empty lots and abandoned buildings that provided excellent cover for Jean Wu's assault team. Lila crouched beside him on the roof of an adjacent structure, watching through night vision scopes as his men moved into position with silent efficiency. "Thermal imaging shows 12 hostiles inside," Chen reported through the comm system. "The child appears to be in a room on the second floor, eastern corner. Security? Light patrol, overconfident positioning. They're expecting you to come in angry and sloppy." Jean Wu's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Then we give them angry and sloppy," he said. "Lila, you remember the plan?" She nodded, checking the medical kit strapped to her vest. Her role was simple: provide emergency medical support for any casualties on either side, and stay out of the way while Jean Wu's team executed the rescue. The plan was perfect until Park's voice echoed from speakers mounted around the warehouse perimeter. "Jean Wu Kim," he called out in accented English. "I know you're out there. Come inside, so we can discuss terms like civilized men." Jean Wu's response was to signal his team into final positions. "You have something that belongs to me," Park continued, "and I have something that belongs to you. Surely we can reach an arrangement." "The only arrangement," Jean Wu said into his comm unit, knowing Park was monitoring their frequency, "is your immediate surrender and the child's release." "So dramatic," Park laughed. "Always so black and white with you. But what if I told you that your woman could walk in here right now, alone and unarmed, and I would release the boy immediately?" Lila felt Jean Wu's attention snap to her like a physical force. "No," he said flatly. "Think about it," Park continued. "One life for another. The child goes free, and we settle our business like men." "What kind of business?" Jean Wu asked, but Lila could see him calculating odds and angles with desperate intensity. "The kind that ends with you understanding that crossing me was a mistake you will not make twice." The implicit threat was clear. Park intended to kill Jean Wu once he had him isolated. But he was offering Marcus's freedom in exchange, and Lila could see that Jean Wu was actually considering making that trade. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "No, Jean Wu. He's a 5-year-old child who's probably terrified out of his mind. If my walking in there gets him out safely, then that's what we do. And then what? I lose you both." "You don't lose either of us," she said firmly, "because you're going to be right behind me, and we're going to end this together." The look he gave her was equal parts admiration and frustration. "You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met," he said, "and you're the most overprotective man I've ever met. We can discuss our personality flaws later. Right now, we need to save Marcus." Jean Wu was quiet for a long moment, and she could practically see him running tactical scenarios in his mind. 2 minutes, he said finally. "You give me 2 minutes to get my people in position, and then you make the trade. But the moment I give the signal, you get Marcus and you run. No matter what else is happening. Deal." The warehouse smelled like rust and motor oil, its cavernous interior lit by harsh work lights that created dramatic shadows between towering stacks of shipping containers. Park waited in the center of the space with theatrical patience, flanked by armed men who tracked Lila's movement with professional attention. Marcus stood beside him, small and brave, and trying not to cry. When he saw her, his face lit up with relief and hope that made her heart break. "Aunt Lila," he called out. "Hey, baby," she called back. "Everything's going to be okay." "How touching," Park said. "The child has been asking for you constantly. Children are so trusting, aren't they? They believe the adults in their lives will always come to save them." "Let him go," Lila said. "I'm here just like you wanted." "Indeed you are. But where is Jean Wu? Surely he would not send his woman to face danger alone. He's smart enough to know a trap when he sees one." Park's smile was cold and calculating. "Or perhaps he cares less than you think he does. Perhaps you are simply another asset to be managed rather than a woman to be cherished." The psychological game was obvious, but Lila found herself responding to it anyway. The fear that Jean Wu might see her as a liability rather than a partner was one she had been carefully not examining. "He'll come," she said with more confidence than she felt. "Will he?" Park gestured to one of his men, who moved closer to Marcus with predatory intent. "Or will he cut his losses and find another nurse to warm his bed?" That was when Jean Wu's voice cut through the warehouse air with lethal clarity. "The only thing I'm going to cut," he said, stepping out of the shadows with his weapon trained on Park's center mass, "is your life expectancy down to the next 30 seconds. The relief that flooded through Lila was so intense it made her dizzy. He had come, just as she had known he would, and the cold fury in his voice suggested that Park had made a fatal error in threatening both her and Marcus. "Jean Wu Kim," Park said with genuine pleasure. "Finally, we can settle our business properly. Our business was settled 2 years ago when you chose betrayal over loyalty. This is simply the collection of an outstanding debt." The firefight that erupted was brief and decisive. Jean Wu's team had positioned themselves with tactical precision, turning Park's overconfidence against him. Lila threw herself toward Marcus the moment the first shot was fired, covering the child's body with her own while chaos erupted around them. When the gunfire stopped, Park lay bleeding on the warehouse floor while Jean Wu's men secured the remaining hostiles. Jean Wu himself appeared beside Lila and Marcus, his hands gentle as he helped them to their feet. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with residual fear and fury. "We're okay," Lila replied, but she could feel Marcus trembling against her side. Jean Wu knelt down to the child's eye level, his expression softening as he took in the boy's frightened but brave face. "You were very brave, Marcus," he said quietly. "I am proud of you." "I knew you would come," Marcus replied with the absolute faith of a child who had learned to trust this dangerous man completely. "Always," Jean Wu promised. "I will always come for both of you." As Jean Wu's team finished securing the scene and called for medical assistance for the wounded, Lila found herself pressed against his chest again, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne mixed with gunpowder and adrenaline. "I thought I might lose you both," he said quietly. "Never," she replied. "We're yours, Jean Wu, completely and forever." The words hung between them like a vow, carrying weight that went far beyond the immediate crisis. When he pulled back to look at her, she could see something fundamental shifting in his dark eyes. "I love you," he said simply. "I love you too." Marcus looked up at both of them with the satisfaction of a child who had been waiting for the adults in his life to figure out what was obvious to everyone else. "Does this mean Jean Wu is going to marry you?" he asked. Jean Wu's smile was soft and genuine as he looked down at the boy who had somehow become as precious to him as the woman he held in his arms. "Would you like that?" he asked. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "Then yes," Jean Wu said, his gaze returning to Lila's face. "If she will have me." "Try to stop me," Lila replied. As sirens wailed in the distance, and Jean Wu's team continued their efficient cleanup, the three of them stood together in the middle of the warehouse that had nearly torn them apart, holding each other with the fierce intensity of people who had come too close to losing everything that mattered. The external threats were neutralized. Park would face justice for his crimes. The Kozlov brothers would think twice before crossing Jean Wu Kim again, and Derek's debts were now Jean Wu's problem to solve. But more importantly, the careful walls they had built around their hearts were finally down, leaving nothing between them but love, trust, and the unshakable knowledge that they were stronger together than any of them had ever been alone. 3 weeks after the warehouse rescue, Lila woke to the sound of Marcus laughing in the kitchen and the familiar scent of Jean Wu's coffee brewing in the expensive machine he claimed was essential to civilized morning routines. The penthouse had transformed from a sterile showcase into something that actually felt like home, with Marcus's artwork displayed on the refrigerator and Lila's medical journals scattered across the coffee table. The external threats that had brought them together were finally completely resolved. Parjungo was serving a lengthy prison sentence, having discovered that attempting to kidnap the nephew of Jean Wu Kim's woman carried severe legal consequences when one had the resources to ensure justice was both swift and comprehensive. The Kozlov brothers had received a visit from Jean Wu's negotiation team that left them eager to write off Derek's debt as a business loss rather than risk further complications. Derek himself was enrolled in a gambling addiction program in Nevada, his future monitored but no longer Lila's responsibility, which meant that for the first time in a month, she was genuinely free to leave if she chose. Jean Wu had made that abundantly clear the night before, sitting across from her at the dinner table while Marcus built architectural marvels from his mashed potatoes. His voice had been carefully neutral as he explained that all protection arrangements were now officially dissolved, that she had her own bank account with sufficient funds to establish herself anywhere she wanted, and that his security team would ensure safe passage wherever she decided to go. The offer of freedom had been thorough, generous, and delivered with the kind of controlled emotion that told her how much it cost him to make it. Now, watching him through the kitchen doorway as he patiently helped Marcus flip pancakes, while wearing an expensive suit that somehow managed to survive the 5-year-old's enthusiastic assistance, Lila realized that leaving had never been a real option. Not because she couldn't, but because she didn't want to. This was where she belonged. "Good morning," Jean Wu said when he noticed her in the doorway, his smile soft and genuine in a way that still surprised her sometimes. "Morning," she replied, accepting the cup of perfectly prepared coffee he handed her. "What time is your meeting with the Los Angeles City Council?" 11:30, which gives me time to drive Marcus to his new school and still arrive fashionably on time to discuss my completely legitimate development project. The fact that Jean Wu was transitioning more of his business operations into legal enterprises was something they had discussed extensively. His organization would always operate in gray areas, but he was making deliberate choices to minimize the violence and maximize the legitimate opportunities. It was a delicate balance, but one he seemed committed to maintaining. "Aunt Lila," Marcus called from his position as sous chef. "Jean Wu says we can go to the beach this weekend. Can we build sand castles?" "Absolutely," she replied, ruffling his hair as she joined them at the stove. The domestic normalcy of the scene was almost surreal when she considered how they had arrived at this point. A month ago, she had been a single nurse struggling to balance her career with sudden guardianship of her nephew. Now, she was part of something that felt remarkably like a family, even if the technical definitions remained undefined. "Jean Wu," she said as Marcus ran off to get ready for school. "We need to talk." His expression grew cautious, and she realized he was bracing himself for the conversation where she explained why she was leaving. "Relax," she said with a smile. "I'm not going anywhere." The relief that crossed his features was immediate and profound. But I do have some terms, she continued. Terms? If we're doing this, if we're really building a life together, then I need some things to be clear between us. Jin Woo leaned against the kitchen counter, his full attention focused on her with the intensity she had come to associate with important negotiations. State your terms, he said. Equal partnership. Not protection, not possession, not management. Partnership. I make my own decisions about my career, my friendships, and my life, and you respect those decisions even when they make you uncomfortable. Agreed. I continue practicing medicine, but I'm open to working primarily with your organization if that makes you feel better about security concerns. However, I maintain my medical ethics and my right to refuse treatment directives that violate my professional standards. Understood. We raise Marcus together, but major decisions about his education, health care, and welfare are made jointly. You don't override me, I don't override you. We figure out together like actual partners. Of course. And if you ever have your security team manage my social interactions again, I will put medical-grade sedatives in your coffee and leave you unconscious long enough to redecorate this entire penthouse in hot pink. Jin Woo's lips curved in genuine amusement. I believe you would, he said. Those are acceptable terms. Good. Now I have a question for you. Yes? Are you going to ask me to marry you? Or am I going to have to propose myself? The directness of the question clearly caught him off guard. Jin Woo was silent for a long moment, and she could see him processing the implications of her assumption that marriage was not only on the table but expected. I had planned to ask, he said finally, but I wanted to give you time to be certain this was what you wanted, not simply what circumstances had forced upon you. Jin Woo, she said gently, moving closer to him. I chose you the night I agreed to come here. I chose you again when I decided to work at your clinic. I chose you when I walked into that warehouse to save Marcus. And I'm choosing you now, when I have complete freedom to walk away. How much more certain do I need to be? Jin Woo reached into his suit jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that he had apparently been carrying for some time. Marry me, he said simply, not because circumstances require it, not because protection demands it, but because I love you more than I thought it was possible to love anyone, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that every day. The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire diamond in a platinum setting that managed to be both elegant and understated. It was exactly what she would have chosen for herself, which meant he had been paying attention to her preferences with the same careful observation he applied to everything else. Yes, she said, holding out her hand so he could slide the ring onto her finger. The kiss that followed was soft and sweet and full of promises about their future together. When they finally broke apart, Marcus appeared in the doorway, wearing his new school uniform and an expression of deep satisfaction. Finally, he said, I was wondering when you two were going to figure that out. How long have you been standing there? Lila asked. Long enough to see the ring. Does this mean we get to have a real wedding with cake and everything? Jin Woo looked at Lila with a question in his eyes. What kind of wedding would you want? He asked. The kind where your family gets to meet mine, she said. The kind where we blend Korean traditions with Southern ones, where there's amazing food and dancing and a 5-year-old best man who gets to wear a tiny tuxedo. Marcus pumped his fist in the air with enthusiasm that suggested he was fully prepared to embrace his role in the wedding planning. Can I help pick the cake flavor? He asked. You could be in charge of cake flavor selection, Jin Woo promised solemnly. 2 months later, Lila stood in the bridal suite of an elegant hotel overlooking the Pacific, adjusting the sleeves of her hanbok while her sister Deshawn, newly returned from deployment, fussed with the traditional Korean hairpiece that complemented her modern wedding dress. You realize you're marrying the most dangerous man on the West Coast, Deshawn said for the 3rd time that morning. I'm marrying the man who reads bedtime stories to your son every night and learned how to make Southern cornbread because he wanted to make me feel at home, Lila replied. The dangerous part is just his day job. And you're okay with the day job? I'm okay with the man. The day job comes with the package, and honestly, after everything we've been through, I'd rather have someone dangerous on my side than someone harmless who can't protect what matters. Deshawn studied her sister's face in the mirror, clearly looking for signs of doubt or coercion. What she found was contentment and joy that made her own expression soften. "He makes you happy," she said. "He makes me feel like the best version of myself. And he's given Marcus the father figure he needed while still respecting that you're his mother. That's not nothing." "No," Lila agreed. "That's everything." The ceremony itself was a perfect blend of cultures and traditions. Jin-woo looked devastating in traditional Korean formal wear, his usual precise control softened by genuine emotion as he watched her walk down the aisle. The vows they exchanged were personal and heartfelt, promising partnership rather than possession, strength rather than submission. Marcus performed his duties as ring-bearer with solemn dignity, though his composure cracked when Jin-woo officially asked his permission to become part of their family. The sight of this dangerous man kneeling down to ask a 5-year-old's blessing brought tears to more than a few eyes among the assembled guests. When Jin-woo's Halmini, his grandmother who had flown in from Seoul, embraced Lila and whispered in accented English that she was grateful her grandson had finally found someone to bring light into his life, Lila felt the last piece of her new reality click into place. This was her family now. All of it. The good and the complicated and the absolutely worth fighting for. 6 months after the wedding, Lila stood in the same kitchen where Jin-woo had first made her coffee, one hand pressed to her still flat stomach while she processed the implications of the pregnancy test she had just taken. They had talked about children in abstract terms, someday plans that felt distant and theoretical. Apparently, someday had arrived ahead of schedule. Jin-woo found her there 20 minutes later, still staring at the positive test with a mixture of joy and terror that she was pretty sure was standard for unexpected pregnancies. "Good news or concerning news?" he asked, reading her expression with the accuracy of someone who had made a study of her emotional tells. "Both?" she said, holding up the test. Jin-woo went completely still for approximately 3 seconds before his face transformed with the kind of wonder usually reserved for witnessing miracles. "You're certain?" he asked. "As certain as modern medical science can make me." He crossed the kitchen in 2 strides and swept her into his arms with a gentleness that spoke of his awareness that everything about how he touched her had just changed. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Terrified," she admitted. "Happy. Overwhelmed. Ready to throw up, but I think that's morning sickness, not emotional reaction." Jin-woo's laugh was soft and full of joy. "We are having a baby," he said, as if testing the words. "We are having a baby," she confirmed. "Marcus is going to lose his mind with excitement. He's going to want to help pick names, and choose the nursery theme, and probably redecorate our entire bedroom to be more baby-appropriate." Jin-woo's expression grew thoughtful as he considered the implications. "I will need to adjust security protocols," he said, "and we should discuss whether you want to continue working at the clinic during the pregnancy." Lila pulled back to look at him directly, recognizing the signs of Jin-woo's protective instincts shifting into overdrive. "We will discuss security adjustments," she said firmly. "Together, like partners. Not you making unilateral decisions about my life, because I'm carrying your child." "Our child," he corrected, but his smile acknowledged her point. "And yes, we will discuss everything. Together." "Good. Now come help me figure out how to tell Marcus he's going to be a big brother." That evening, as they sat together on the couch with Marcus between them, reading stories about new babies and growing families, Lila caught Jin-woo watching them with an expression of profound contentment. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I am thinking about wrong numbers," he said quietly. "Wrong numbers?" "The text you sent that night when you were desperate for help. It was supposed to go to someone named Keisha, but it came to me instead. 1 digit different, and our lives would never have intersected." Lila considered this, thinking about the chain of coincidences that had brought them together. "Maybe it wasn't wrong," she said. "Maybe it was exactly right, just not in the way anyone expected." Jin-woo's arm tightened around her as Marcus fell asleep against his side, the picture of a child completely secure in the love of the adults who had chosen to build a family around him. "I used to believe that control was the only thing that mattered," Jin-woo said. "That power and preparation could eliminate all variables and guarantee the outcomes I wanted. And now I know that the best things in my life came from a wrong number sent at 2 in the morning by someone I had never met who needed help with a little one in danger. Lila leaned into his warmth, feeling their unborn child and their sleeping nephew and their quietly dangerous husband, and realized that sometimes the universe had its own plans that were better than anything human control could devise. "You're right," she said. "It was exactly the right number after all."